All right, I'm going to assume that the audio is picking up. Okay, it's been a while, but I finally thought of something that I wanted to talk to you guys about. And one big thing is about how President Trump's withdrawal from some of these international agreements have actually been a benefit in a surprising way. So let's get into it. Okay, of course, a few years back, you guys remember when President Trump he got into office, and then soon after he withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. That wasn't one of the major ones. That was more of a symbolic gesture of, oh, he didn't want to do some of these international um, agreements of we're going to do something that actually going to benefit just a lot of the population in general, for especially for the world. But the biggest problem with the Paris Climate Accords, the Paris Climate Agreement, is it wasn't binding. There were no hard and fast rules that any of the countries had to actually implement. So we'd actually limit any climate change and a lot of this excessive pollution that we're putting into our atmosphere. So that was, of course, that was a poor move, but in the grand scheme of things, and or too big of an influence, but it was just the abstract fact of he didn't want to work with other nations to do something for other people, which was the big deal of him withdrawing from that. Another thing that President Trump, well, former President Trump withdrew from was keeping the embassy, the Israeli embassy in Tel Aviv, and moved it to Jerusalem. Of course, that was a poor decision because he was just placating to the Israeli government and just trying to undermine the Palestinian rights as people, and have been able to, and just having them to be able to work towards some kind of actual agreement to actually coexist or to make a two-state solution. So with him moving and declaring Jerusalem the capital of Israel, that really empowered the Israeli government to actually implement even more brutal conditions for the Palestinians with their illegal police state and their illegal occupation. And it's just been a horrible decision and horrible for the Palestinians, and it undermined President Trump's a possibility of implementing peace internationally. And international agreements that one of the biggest international agreements that President Trump withdrew from was the Iran nuclear deal, also called the JCPOA. And because of President Trump withdrawing from some of these international agreements, combined with him starting a trade war with China, what that really did was, since he was kind of withdrawing from some of the international, leadership position that the United States was in, and a lot of it is really just colonialism, just really trying to extract wealth from other nations. But since he started withdrawing the United States from that leadership position, the other nations started organizing around that to say, you know what, well, maybe we don't want the United States to be the unipolar power internationally, and we need to actually organize around a multipolar or multinational agreements and really not allow the United States to dictate whichever terms they want, because they're going to always try to extract the wealth or suppress other nations in favor of themselves. A lot of countries do that, but the United States is more egregious because we overthrow other governments if they don't do what we want. And how this ties into Joe Biden or President Biden is what President Biden should have done is within the first week of his presidency, he should have just signed The Iran nuclear deal say we're getting back into the deal. There's no real good reason for us to try to make a better deal, as Trump put it, and it was such a horrible deal. So, and plus with the sanctions imposed on Iran, that's really killing their economy right now, and it's really hurting the people that live there. Just the poor and working class people of Iran that live there, they're suffering under these economic sanctions, and that's some of the shit that we really do not need our government to be doing. It's just crushing other people in another nation just because they want to fucking save face. I'm not sure what other concessions President Biden thinks he would be able to get from the Iranian government, especially since the Trump administration withdrew from the agreement, so that actually made the agreement null. So the Iranian government didn't have to comply with any of the rules for the agreement because the United States withdrawing from it killed it. So I got an article here from jacobinmag.com, and it goes into it. I'll start from the top. On Friday, and it doesn't really display the date. Never mind. This was from late March, so this is about a month and a few days old. But I still wanted to talk about President Biden and this JCPOA deal. And, well, on Friday, an anonymous U.S. official told Reuters that who goes first is not the issue when it comes to the United States and Iran reviving their 2015 nuclear deal. This was a remarkable statement because if it truly doesn't matter who goes first, then it's fair to ask why we're now more than 2 months into the Biden administration and we still haven't seen any progress toward patching up the agreement. The Obama administration, with 5 other nations known as the 5+1 of the UN Security Council, plus Germany, negotiated the JCPOA to contain Iran's nuclear program. In exchange for broad sanctions relief, the Iranian government agreed to abide by strict limits on uranium enrichment. Okay, and let's skip down a little bit. It says the JCPOA worked, at least from the Obama administration's perspective. Companies and banks were nervous that the next administration could just kill the JCPOA and sanctions would be implemented back in place. So businesses didn't want to have to deal with that. And of course they were right because President Trump, he pulled out the deal. So since the United States withdrew out of the pact, Iran also was able to ramp up uranium enrichment. So right now Joe Biden is trying to get Iran to cut back on their enrichment program. And the biggest deal is that President Trump already withdrew, so they were already able to enrich their uranium. But as long as they just put away the pride for 2 fucking seconds, go back into the Iranian nuclear deal, sign it back up, they won't enrich, and everything will be cool. And then I've been hearing Sputnik News talking about even though they may enrich to 90% within the next, who knows, year or so, if the Biden administration doesn't want to actually just bend the knee and sign back into the agreement, they still don't have a delivery system to actually use it. And anyways, there's still not too much. I'd say there's not really too much incentive for them to actually use it unless they get invaded. So unless a war breaks out with Iran, we really don't have to worry about too much. We don't have to worry too much about them using a nuclear weapon that they might be able to finish creating or finish enriching the uranium in a short period of time. But the biggest takeaway that I have right now is that the Biden administration can't just unilaterally go and just implement and just push around whatever demands they want to other nations, and them nations actually buckle under the U.S. Pressure, because it's been a few years where they've been able to, do international agreements, not necessarily with the United States leading it. So they're really not having that shit, and that's actually positive for people all across the world.